In just 47 seconds, America's sweetheart Julia Roberts would transform from Hollywood royalty into a woman pushed beyond her breaking point, unleashing a verbal assault that would leave Jennifer Hudson speechless and the studio audience in stunned silence. What started as subtle passive-aggressive jabs from the host would escalate into the most explosive confrontation daytime television has witnessed in years, culminating in Roberts storming off set while cameras rolled. The tension was palpable from the moment Julia Roberts stepped onto Jennifer Hudson's talk show set last night. What viewers initially witnessed appeared to be standard celebrity banter. But behind Hudson's seemingly warm smile lurked something far more sinister. The seasoned actress, known for her infectious laugh and magnetic charm, had agreed to promote her latest film project, expecting the usual softball questions about her career and family life. Instead, she found herself walking into what can only be described as a carefully orchestrated ambush. Hudson opened the interview with what seemed like innocent enough questions about Roberts' recent work, but seasoned observers could detect the underlying edge in her voice. "Julia, you've been in this business for over 3 decades now," Hudson began, her tone carrying just the slightest hint of condescension. "Tell us, how does it feel to be considered a veteran actress in an industry that's constantly evolving?" The emphasis on veteran wasn't lost on Roberts, whose smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, Jennifer," Roberts responded with practiced grace, "I prefer to think of myself as experienced rather than veteran. Experience brings wisdom, and wisdom helps you navigate situations like this one." The subtle dig was delivered with Roberts' trademark smile, but her eyes had hardened. Hudson, either missing the warning or choosing to ignore it, pressed forward with increasing boldness. The conversation took its first sharp turn when Hudson brought up Roberts' recent comments about method acting in a previous interview. "You mentioned in Variety that you think some younger actors today take method acting too seriously. That's quite a statement coming from someone who's worked with some of the most respected method actors of our time." Hudson leaned forward, her posture aggressive despite her maintained smile. "Are you suggesting that dedication to craft is somehow excessive?" Roberts shifted in her chair, her legendary composure beginning to show hairline cracks. "I think there's a difference between dedication and pretension, Jennifer. True professionals know how to separate their work from their personal lives. They don't need to make a spectacle of their process." The barb was clearly aimed at Hudson herself, who had recently made headlines for her own dramatic preparation methods for an upcoming film role. Hudson's laugh came out forced and hollow. "Oh, so you're the authority on what makes a true professional now? That's fascinating. Coming from someone who's been known to be quite particular on set." The studio audience grew noticeably quieter, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Robert's smile never wavered, but her knuckles were white as she gripped the armrests of her chair. "Particular about quality, yes," Roberts replied evenly. "I believe in giving audiences the best possible performance. Some people might confuse that with being difficult, but I've never been concerned with being liked by everyone." The implication hung heavy in the air. Roberts was drawing a clear line in the sand. Hudson's next move would prove to be her critical error. Leaning back with false casualness, she decided to go for the jugular. "Speaking of being liked, there have been persistent rumors over the years about your, let's call them, demanding requirements for interviews and appearances. Is it true that you have a list of forbidden topics that reporters aren't allowed to discuss?" The question was delivered with mock innocence, but everyone in the studio knew they had just witnessed a declaration of war. Robert's laugh was sharp and mirthless. "You know what, Jennifer? You're absolutely right. I do have boundaries. Professional boundaries. Something some talk show hosts seem to struggle with understanding." The word "some" dripped with disdain as Roberts fixed Hudson with a stare that could cut glass. The studio audience was now completely silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Hudson, realizing she had crossed a line but too committed to her aggressive approach to back down, doubled down instead. "Well, boundaries are important," she said with mock agreement. "But so is authenticity. Audiences can tell when someone's being genuine versus when they're just performing all the time." That was the moment Julia Roberts' famous composure finally began to crack in earnest. Her smile disappeared entirely, replaced by a look of barely controlled fury. "Performing?" she repeated slowly. each syllable dripping with venom. That's rich, coming from someone whose entire career has been built on performing a version of herself that bears little resemblance to reality. The gloves were officially off now, and what happened next would shock even the most cynical observers of Hollywood drama. Hudson, perhaps sensing she had awakened something dangerous in her guest, made one final, fatal miscalculation that would transform simmering tension into an all-out war of words. With a smirk that could only be described as predatory, Hudson leaned forward and delivered the blow that would ignite the powder keg. "You know, Julia, I have to ask about something that's been on everyone's mind lately. There are whispers in Hollywood about certain A-list actresses who've become, shall we say, increasingly irrelevant as they age. How does it feel to watch younger, more talented actresses take the roles that might have once been yours?" The studio fell into a deathly silence, so complete you could hear the cameras whirring. Roberts sat perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, her famous smile now completely gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. When she finally spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet, each word precisely enunciated, like bullets being loaded into a chamber. "Irrelevant?" Roberts repeated, her voice gaining volume with each syllable. "You want to talk about irrelevance, Jennifer? Let's talk about a talk show host who peaked as a backup singer and thinks that gives her the right to psychoanalyze Hollywood veterans who were winning Oscars before she knew what a soundstage looked like." Hudson's composure cracked visibly, her fake smile wavering as she realized she had seriously miscalculated. "I think that's a bit harsh," she began, but Roberts cut her off with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Harsh? Oh, honey, I haven't even gotten started yet." Roberts leaned forward, matching Hudson's earlier aggressive posture. "You sit here in your little chair, playing dress-up as a serious interviewer. But what you really are is a gossip peddler desperately trying to create viral moments because your ratings are in the toilet. You think attacking me is going to save your dying show?" The audience gasped audibly, some covering their mouths in shock. This was no longer a celebrity interview. This was a public execution, and Julia Roberts was wielding the axe. Hudson, her face flushing red with a mixture of embarrassment and fury, tried to regain control of the situation. "Julia, I think you're overreacting to what was clearly just," Hudson attempted. But Roberts wasn't finished. "Overreacting?" Roberts stood up from her chair, towering over the seated host. "You ambushed me on national television, questioned my professionalism, my relevance, my career, all while pretending to smile and be my friend. You know what we call that where I come from? We call that being a snake." Hudson shot to her feet as well, any pretense of hospitality now completely abandoned. "How dare you come onto my show and disrespect me like this? You think your little tantrum is going to intimidate me? I've dealt with bigger divas than you, sweetheart." "Diva?" Roberts laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any warmth or humor. "That's the best you can do? Call me a diva? Let me tell you something about divas, Jennifer. Real divas don't need to tear others down to make themselves feel important. Real divas don't hide behind fake smiles while they stick knives in people's backs." The tension in the studio was now so intense that several audience members were visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and looking toward the exits. Camera operators continued filming, knowing they were capturing television gold, no matter how ugly it was becoming. Hudson, now completely flustered and losing control of her own show, made the mistake of trying to match Robert's intensity. "You know what your problem is, Julia?" Hudson snapped, pointing an accusatory finger. "You can't handle the fact that Hollywood has moved on without you. You're a relic from a different era, and instead of aging gracefully, you're lashing out at people who are actually still relevant in this industry." Robert's eyes narrowed to slits, and when she spoke next, her voice was so cold it could have frozen hell itself. "Relevant? You want to talk about relevance? Let's talk about your last movie, Jennifer." "Oh wait, what last movie? While you're here playing host to pay your bills, I'm still getting offered leading roles. While you're desperately trying to stay in the public eye by starting fights with your guests, I'm being courted by directors who actually matter." "That's enough," Hudson shouted, her professionalism finally cracking completely. "You don't get to come on my show and talk to me like that. This is my house, and you're going to show me some goddamn respect." Roberts tilted her head slightly, a dangerous smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Your house? This cheap soundstage? Honey, I've worked on sets that cost more than your entire annual budget. And as for respect, respect is earned, not demanded. And you, Jennifer Hudson, have done absolutely nothing to earn mine. The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch, with both women standing and facing each other down like gunfighters in an Old West showdown. The audience was completely silent, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Production assistants stood frozen at their posts, unsure whether to continue filming or try to intervene. But this was only the beginning of what would become the most infamous moment in daytime television history. Hudson, her face now flushed with rage and embarrassment, decided to go nuclear. You know what, Julia? Since you want to talk about careers, let's talk about yours. When was the last time you had a hit that wasn't riding on your reputation from 20 years ago? When was the last time anyone under 30 gave a shit about Julia Roberts? The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and for a moment, Roberts looked genuinely stunned by the viciousness of the attack. But that moment of vulnerability lasted exactly 3 seconds before it transformed into something far more dangerous, a cold, calculating fury that would have made Medusa herself take a step back. Under 30? Roberts repeated slowly, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the studio. You want to know what people under 30 think of me, Jennifer? They think I'm a fucking legend. They study my performances in acting classes. They quote my movies. And you know what they think of you? They think you're a cautionary tale about what happens when someone gets a talk show they don't deserve. Hudson's mouth fell open in shock at the explicit language. But Roberts was just getting warmed up. She stepped closer, invading Hudson's personal space, with the confidence of someone who had spent decades commanding movie sets. Let me tell you something about staying power, sweetheart, Roberts continued, her voice rising with each word. I've been A-list longer than you've been famous, period. While you were grinding it out in Chicago nightclubs, I was making movies that will outlast both of us. And when your little talk show gets canceled, and it will get canceled, I'll still be Julia fucking Roberts. The audience was now audibly gasping, with some people actually standing up to get a better view of the carnage. Hudson, completely overwhelmed by the verbal assault, tried desperately to regain some semblance of control. Security! Hudson called out, her voice cracking with emotion. Get her out of here! I don't have to take this abuse on my own show. But Roberts wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She threw back her head and laughed. That famous Julia Roberts laugh. But there was no joy in it, only contempt. Security? Really? You're going to have me escorted out because you can't handle the consequences of your own actions? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You dish it out, but you can't take it when someone fights back. 2 security guards had started moving toward the stage area, but they hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of physically removing one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Roberts noticed their reluctance and seized the moment. Don't worry, boys, she said, addressing the security team with mock sweetness. I wouldn't give this pathetic excuse for a host the satisfaction of having me dragged out. But before I go, let me leave you with something to think about, Jennifer. Roberts moved even closer to Hudson, who instinctively took a step back. You thought you could ambush me, embarrass me, make me look bad to boost your own pathetic ratings. But all you've done is show the world who you really are. A bitter, jealous, small-minded person who attacks others because she can't stand that they're better than her. Hudson's eyes were now filled with tears of rage and humiliation. You can't talk to me like this. You can't. I can and I am. Roberts cut her off with finality. And you know why? Because I'm Julia Roberts, and you're just some talk show host who will be forgotten 5 minutes after your show gets canceled. I've been dealing with bullies like you my entire career, and I've outlasted every single one of them. The silence in the studio was deafening as Roberts turned away from Hudson and addressed the audience directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here expecting entertainment, not to watch your host attack a guest for cheap thrills. You deserve better than this. With that, Roberts began walking toward the edge of the stage, her head held high with the dignity of someone who had just won a war. Hudson, desperate to have the last word, shouted after her. Don't you walk away from me. This is my show. You don't get to just leave. Roberts paused at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time, that famous smile returning. But now, it was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Your show?" Roberts laughed. "Honey, after tonight, you might not have a show. Good luck explaining to your producers why you decided to pick a fight with Julia Roberts and lost spectacularly." And with that devastating final blow, Roberts walked off the stage, leaving behind a stunned audience, a humiliated host, and what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about television moment of the year. Hudson stood alone on her own stage, tears streaming down her face, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The cameras continued rolling as Hudson tried to compose herself, but the damage was done. In the span of less than 10 minutes, she had transformed from talk show host to viral sensation, and not in a good way. As Roberts disappeared behind the stage curtains, probably never to return, Hudson was left to face the wreckage of what she had created through her own arrogance and miscalculation. The audience began to murmur among themselves, phones already out and recording, ensuring that this moment would live forever in internet infamy. Hudson had gotten her viral moment. All right, just not the kind she had been hoping for. In trying to take down Julia Roberts, she had instead destroyed herself, proving once and for all that in Hollywood, some legends are simply untouchable.